Hello, everyone, and welcome back. In this lecture, I'm going to be talking about the change control process initially, and then what I'll do in the second part of this lecture, I'm going to go over the change control form that you would be filling out to execute the change control. And to this first point here, some of the circumstances around the change control in this particular context would be if it's in regards to your budgeting, you're going to need extra funding, or if you're going to be reducing funding, you're going to necessitate a change control. Now, I know you might be looking at reducing funding and kind of frowning there, but actually it's a good idea to actually reduce your budget. If you're over budget, and you definitely know that you're not going to be using those funds, it's a good idea to give it back to the organization via a change control, because the organization can take that money back and apply that money to a different investment within the same calendar year. So they can take your money, let's say, for example, if you're not going to be using $200,000 out of a $2 million budget, that would be beneficial to the organization to take that $200,000, and they can probably reinvest that into multiple smaller projects or a medium-sized project. So that's what you want to do with a change control for a situation where you need to reduce funding. Another reason why you want to submit it when you're reducing funding is because your SPI or CPI calculations that we discussed before in a previous lecture, those particular calculations might be thrown off by your over budget. So your project is going to be trending to be underperforming and under budget during its duration. So you definitely want to give back any major source of extra funding, or in a situation where you need extra funding. Those are the two situations mainly when you submit a budget change control. To the second point here, you need to take a step back and reforecast how much you're going to need for change control, for a budgetary change control, and you're going to reach out to the project resources as well as the resource managers or their particular managers, and you're going to repeat the process that we discussed previously, where you're attaining hourly estimations each month for those resources. And then to the second point here, you want to take those hourly estimates and then you want to convert it to actual dollar values via country rates. So it's a repetitive process from before, but one that you need to do to estimate how much extra money you're going to need based on how many resources need extra time on the project. Now, the same thing applies to the vendor here on this third point, where if the vendor schedule changes, you may need an SOW addendum or alteration to update accordingly. And this is especially true if, let's say, for example, a vendor is producing a milestone of $50,000 in May, but that there might be a delay in schedule where the vendor might not deliver that milestone until June, and the cost may be increased. Maybe it's $100,000. So you would have to update the SOW with that vendor for those parameters. And then what happens is, the reason why you want to do that is because on the back end, the purchase order dashboard is updated. So in that way, finance and procurement, they're aware of what changes are being made to the contract with the vendor, and the purchase order dashboard can be updated accordingly. You want to do this change control for this. You don't want to just go ahead and make agreements with the vendor that they're going to receive payment. You must go through this SOW addendum process first to make sure that finance and your company's procurement are okay with taking on those changes. So that's what you want to do here. And then lastly, think about what other purchases need to be made for the project. If purchases are driving your project to be over budget, just make sure you have a handle on everything that's going to be purchased, such as hardware, licenses, software, telecom services. It could be anything. Just make sure all of these components here in this middle section, these 4 bullet points here, make sure you have these estimates tightly aligned. So in that way, you know exactly how much money extra you're going to be asking for in the change control. One thing I want to discuss here, lastly, this last bullet point here, is the proactivity. You have to be proactive on this if you realize there are changes necessary to your project. And a good idea here, to this first subpoint, it's a good idea every week to analyze your budget and your project, and to see how the costs are going, and to see how your budget is trending every single week. Because the moment you realize that you need changes to your budget or you need to make alterations, you have to let your executive stakeholders know, and you have to let your PMO know, because you want to initiate this change control process immediately when you realize your budget is in trouble. And that goes to the second bullet point here. You don't want to wait. If you need adjustments to your budget, do it immediately via change control. And even before you do that, you should sit down with your executive stakeholder management, have a meeting with them, and discuss why exactly the budget is trending the way it is. Provide an explanation as to why you're going to need extra funding. Make sure you get their approval first. Don't just go into the system and submit a change control. Get approval from the executive stakeholders first. And then to this last sub-bullet here, you want to be proactive and get on this as soon as possible, because bad news ages badly. This is a term that I've heard from a former colleague, and it goes to the context of a bottle of wine. Certain wines age well, bad news ages badly. So you don't want to sit on things. You want to be definitely proactive. Going to our next slide, this is actually the information that you're going to be entering. Again, to the first bullet point here, it's best if you have some sort of automated tool or portal or PPM system that does change controls automatively. But if you don't, you may be using forms with manual signatures or digital signatures. That's fine. But to this second bullet point here, typically in my experience, the information that's on change controls is some of the obvious ones like project name, or if your company leverages some sort of ID, you're going to have that. Of course, you'll have the project manager. Third sub bullet here is what exactly is changing. Is it the scope that's changing? Again, this is a previous conversation with executive stakeholders. You have to confirm that they're on board with the scope changing. If that's the case, you need to submit a change control. Project start and finish dates. If your schedule is trending to finish later, again, you have to get agreement with the executive stakeholder management that they're fine with that, and you're putting in a change control here to change the dates. And of course, here in regards to budget, this is what we've been talking about so far. Again, you want to have a conversation with the executive stakeholder management to make sure they're on board with your budget maneuvers as it pertains to the change control. Now, one thing I want to bring up here, it's an item called risk of not executing the change. And in certain organizations I've worked at, I haven't seen this, but I think it's good to indicate this. If you have like a change control form, it's good to have a section called this, risk of not executing the change. And what this does is that it basically tells the executive management who's approving the finances, it tells them what is the risk of them not executing this change control. And it would be fantastic if you can quantify it. Like, for example, if this change control is not executed, the project will come in under budget, and the company may lose, $2 million, or the savings may be impacted by $5 million. We won't save as much as we thought we would if this project is put on hold, or we decide not to execute this project. So I think somewhere, if there's a way to put in a section where there's a risk of not executing the change, I think that's pretty important there. And then, of course, you have the approval process. If you're using an automated system, maybe what happens is there's a workflow that happens in that automated system. The approvers get emails, and then electronically they approve, and then the next person in the workflow approves it. If you're doing manual documentation, maybe there's physical signatures, and then you have to scan documentation for confirmation of approval. Now, one last thing here. understand that any changes to your project cannot happen unless the change control is approved. So the lectures that we spoke about before where we spoke about reforecasting and budgeting monthly, you cannot do any of that unless the change control is approved formally. Now, what you can do is that you can do it informally, like let's say, for example, on an Excel sheet that's offline. You can do your financial analysis there, assuming that this change control will be approved. Then in that way, when it comes time to formally enter your numbers into the automated system, you would have done your analysis already, and there's less work there. But from a formal sense, no changes can happen until this change control is approved. Because when the change control is approved, that means that everyone who had to look at that change control information approved that change control information, and you're good to go to make your budgetary changes. And that goes to the last point here. If you've done your analysis offline, then you're ready to immediately make changes to this. So this closes out this particular lecture on the change control process. Again, if you have any questions, definitely reach out to me and I'll get back to you.